when I first walked through the side entrance of St. Mary's Medical Center in Grand Rapids, I didn't think anything extraordinary would happen. I was 23, freshly scrubbed in my intern scrubs, holding my orientation folder like a child clutches their lunchbox on the first day of school. My ID badge still smelled like plastic. I had no idea that within that same building, behind a quiet hallway and a locked door, was a little boy who would alter the entire course of my life. It was the first cold morning of October, the kind that nips at your skin even through a wool coat. I remember thinking how strangely warm the pediatric wing was, almost suffocating in contrast, like they wanted to shelter children from the outside world by cranking the heat and drawing the blinds. But the warmth didn't hide the exhaustion on the nurses' faces, the kind that goes deeper than fatigue, the kind that lives in your bones. I was assigned to Nurse Maggie Connors, the most senior nurse on the floor. Late 50s, gray hair tightly pulled into a bun, no-nonsense tone, clipboard always in hand. She greeted me with a nod that barely passed for acknowledgement and handed me a stack of intake forms. "You'll follow me today. Don't touch anything without asking. Don't interrupt unless someone's bleeding out." We walked the floor, one hallway after another. Each room had its own rhythm: beeping monitors, soft lullabies, the occasional cries of colicky infants. Maggie spoke in clipped sentences. "This is the med supply room. That's the observation bay. Rooms 201 through 205 are for children with guardians. Rooms 206 and 207, those are different." She stopped abruptly in front of a door at the end of a quiet corridor. There was a glass partition separating it from the rest of the ward. A simple sign on the wall read, "Pediatric isolation restricted access." Maggie turned to me, voice lower now. "This is the quiet room," she said. "We call it that because the children in here, they don't cry much anymore. These are the ones left behind. Parents walk out once they hear the diagnosis. Papers signed. No second thoughts." I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened as she pushed the door open. Inside were 4 metal cribs, lined against the wall. One child had hydrocephalus, another, a 2-year-old girl, lay still as stone with eyes too wise for her age. But it was the smallest one, farther back, barely moving, that drew me in. 6 months old, if that. His limbs twitched occasionally, uncontrolled. His face was pale, lips chapped, but his eyes were a deep, quiet brown. He wasn't crying, just watching, like he'd already learned not to expect anything from the world. "That's Noah," Maggie said. "Cerebral palsy, mild respiratory issues. His mother handed him off the day after delivery. Said she wanted to live her life, not take care of a mistake." I stepped closer to the crib. Noah didn't flinch, didn't blink, but something in me shifted. I didn't know it yet, but in that moment, I was already becoming his mother. My first week passed in a blur of forms, rounds, and hushed hallway whispers. Most of my fellow interns buried themselves in charts or clung to their mentors like lifelines. But my mind, it always drifted back to that quiet room. To Noah. Every time I had a break, even just 10 minutes, I found a reason to go back. Check a monitor. Drop off a blanket. Ask Maggie a vague question. And every time he was there, still, silent, watching. On my 6th night, the pediatric unit exploded with chaos. 3 emergency admissions, 2 fever spikes, 1 child seizing. The halls rang with beeping monitors and footsteps pounding linoleum. Maggie's voice cut through the noise like a whip, sharp, practiced, exhausted. "Dawson, 3rd room. You're on vitals." I worked 13 hours straight. No break, no food. Just procedure after procedure until my hands moved on autopilot and my brain dissolved into static. It wasn't until the sun began rising, casting a gray wash over the windows, that I realized I hadn't checked on Noah. Panic snapped me out of my fog. I dropped everything and ran down the long corridor, heart hammering, mouth dry. The door to the quiet room was slightly ajar. A soft draft spilled out, cold and metallic. I stepped inside and froze. The room smelled wrong. Not like baby formula or antiseptic, but stale diaper and something faintly sour. I looked at the whiteboard. Every crib had a feeding time chart beside it. Noah's last mark was at 7 p.m. It was now past 5 a.m. More than 10 hours. I blinked at the board again, trying to make sense of it. Maybe someone had forgotten to mark a feeding? But the room itself told the truth. No fresh bottles, no signs of cleanup, no log chart notes. The rotation sheet must have been missed in the chaos. No one had double-checked. I rushed to his crib. His body lay curled in a fetal position, motionless. His lips were cracked, cheeks hollowed. His chest rose and fell so slowly I had to lean in just to see it. And then I heard it. Not a cry, not even a whimper. Just the faintest sound. A dry, ragged little gasp. Like he didn't believe he'd be heard, but he still hoped. That sound broke something in me. I shouted down the hall. Who was on night feed rotation? A sleepy-eyed nurse poked her head out of the staff room. It was Lila, the new girl. But with all the admissions, I think. Maggie said the priorities were ICU and fevers. Priorities. I looked back at Noah. He had become a non-priority. A child so forgotten. Even his hunger had learned to whisper. I gathered him into my arms. His head slumped weakly against my shoulder. He didn't resist. He didn't reach for me. He just existed. I'm here, I whispered, clutching him tighter. I'm so sorry. And then, without thinking about protocol or shifts or policy, I made a decision that would change everything. I stayed. I bathed him, fed him, cleaned the air around his crib, watched every rise and fall of his breath like it was sacred. And when the sun finally painted the walls in pale gold, I kissed his forehead and said, "You will never go hungry again. Not on my watch." That morning, when the rest of the hospital stirred awake and nurses switched shifts like nothing had happened, I was still there, sitting on the floor of the quiet room. Noah cradled in my arms. He had finally finished the bottle, half an ounce at a time, and drifted into a heavy sleep, one arm draped over my chest like he belonged there. And maybe he did. I stayed past my scheduled hours. No one questioned me. Maybe they thought I had been asked to help. Maybe they didn't care. Either way, I kept coming back. Every break, every free moment. I created a care schedule just for Noah. I adjusted his blankets, massaged his arms and legs to ease the muscle tightness. I warmed his bottles by hand when no one else bothered. The other interns thought I was overcompensating. Maggie warned me not to get too involved. But they hadn't held him. They hadn't seen the way his eyes flickered when I whispered his name, the way his tiny fingers curled instinctively around mine. One afternoon, I leaned over the crib to check his feeding tube, and he looked straight at me, really looked. Not that distant stare I'd seen on day one, but something clearer, something searching. That's when I said it. I promise, Noah, you will never feel invisible again. I didn't even know I was crying until I felt the tears drop onto the edge of his onesie. That same day, I skipped lunch and used the time to draw up his schedule. I posted it on the inside of the quiet room door. Feeding, diapering, stretching, skin-to-skin time. I included my initials on the times I would be there. A few other nurses started filling in blanks too, maybe out of guilt, maybe out of curiosity. I didn't care why. I just wanted consistency, predictability, care. He deserved that. That evening, I brought in a small plush bunny from the hospital gift shop. I placed it next to his pillow. I don't know if he noticed, but for the first time since I met him, he let out a noise, a soft gurgle. Barely a sound, but it was joy, or something like it. Then came the moment I feared most telling Jason. When I walked into our apartment that night, I still smelled like formula and antiseptic. He barely looked up from his laptop. "You're late," he said flatly. I told him about Noah, about what had happened, about how I couldn't stop thinking of him, how something inside me shifted when I heard that faint cry. Jason leaned back, eyes narrowing. "So now what? Your mother Teresa." I didn't answer. You can't save them all, Em. That's not your job. No, I said quietly. But he's not them. He's Noah. Jason shook his head, chuckling bitterly. You're getting too attached. I already am, I whispered. And in that silence between us and the things we didn't say, I felt the first crack form in what we used to call love. Jason and I had been together for 3 years. We met in college, survived finals, long-distance internships, and apartment hunting in a city we could barely afford. He was stable, logical, the kind of man who made dinner reservations 3 weeks in advance and color-coded his closet. And for a long time, that's exactly what I thought I needed. But now he couldn't understand why I was disappearing every night into the pediatric wing of a hospital for a child who wasn't mine. You're obsessed, he said one night as I packed clean blankets into a tote bag. This isn't healthy. It's not about me, I replied, not even looking up. He needs someone, Jason. He laughed once, sharp. He's a patient, not your child. I turned toward him then. What if he was? Jason's expression froze. You're not seriously thinking about adopting him. Silence. You are, he whispered, stepping back like I'd slapped him. My God, Emily, you've lost it. No, I've found something that matters more than pretending I'm okay watching him fade away. Jason paced the room like a man trapped in a box too small. You think love is enough? That cuddling a broken baby makes you some kind of hero. I flinched. His voice softened, but not kindly. You're 23. You don't even have a job yet. What are you going to do? Raise a disabled child in a one-bedroom apartment on an intern's stipend? I'll figure it out, I said. You'll ruin your future. I looked at him then, really looked. And I realized something I hadn't before. Jason loved me as long as I stayed in the version of myself that made sense to him. Structured, predictable, ambitious. But love that only survives within conditions isn't love. It's control, disguised as concern. That night he left. He didn't slam the door. He didn't scream. He just packed a bag, paused in the doorway, and said, "Don't come looking for me." I didn't. At the hospital, I drowned myself in shifts. I volunteered for every overnight, every double. I studied Noah's diagnosis in medical journals, consulted with visiting specialists, learned every inch of cerebral palsy from books, videos, and pure desperation. Maggie noticed, of course. You're still human, Dawson, she muttered as we shared a vending machine dinner. Don't let the system chew you up. I didn't respond. I was afraid if I opened my mouth, the sob I'd been holding in for days would spill out all over the linoleum floor. But one thing had become crystal clear. I had already made my choice. Noah wasn't an obligation. He wasn't a case file or a shift assignment. He was a boy who looked up at me and smiled when I said his name. A boy who finally cried, not because he was in pain, but because he believed someone would come. I had shown up once, and I was going to keep showing up, for as long as he needed me. I filed the first set of paperwork on a Tuesday morning. My hands were shaking as I handed the envelope across the desk to the Department of Family Services. The woman receiving it didn't even look up, just stamped the corner and said, "You'll be notified of the next step." The next step. It felt impossibly far away. Back at the hospital, things moved faster. Noah had been scheduled for transfer to a long-term care facility, what they called state-managed extended pediatric housing, but what we all knew was just a prettier name for being left behind again. Maggie caught me in the hallway when she saw the paperwork sticking out of my backpack. "You really doing this?" she asked, arms folded, eyes sharp. "I am," I said, steady this time. She exhaled through her nose. "You're out of your mind." "I know." She paused, then added quietly, "But that doesn't mean you're wrong." The social worker assigned to Noah's case was polite but skeptical. I was single, young, not yet licensed. I didn't own a home. I didn't have savings. "Emily," she said gently, like trying not to startle a bird, "children with special needs require resources. not just good intentions. "I'm not offering good intentions," I said. "I'm offering a lifetime." But the system wasn't built for heart. It was built for numbers, forms, boxes to check. I didn't fit the boxes. Then one afternoon, as I was finishing my shift, Dr. William Hargrove, the head of pediatrics, called me into his office. I thought I was in trouble. Instead, he handed me a sealed envelope. "My letter of recommendation," he said simply. "I spoke to the board myself. Told them you're already this child's mother, paper or not." I cried in the elevator. Full on, shoulder-shaking sobs. That same night, Jason called. I stared at his name, blinking on the screen, then answered. "I heard," he said flatly. "So you're really going through with this?" "I am." Silence. "I hope you know what you're doing." "I don't," I said honestly, "but I know who I'm doing it for." He scoffed. "You're throwing away everything we built." "No," I said softly. "You just never saw the foundation cracking." He didn't say goodbye, and I didn't cry this time. It felt like closing a book I'd already finished months ago. At the hospital, Noah began to change. His color improved. His neck muscles strengthened. He responded faster when I entered the room. Once, when I picked him up, he leaned his forehead against mine and exhaled this tiny, breathy sound that felt like a sigh of recognition, as if he was saying, "You came back again." I whispered back, "I'm not going anywhere." I was no longer a visitor in his world. I was his anchor. And even if the court hadn't approved me yet, even if the ink wasn't dry, even if the whole world said I wasn't ready, I already knew the truth. He was my son. The day the court granted me temporary custody of Noah, I left the building with shaking hands and a folded letter in my coat pocket like it was made of gold. It wasn't final. Not yet. But it was enough. Enough to bring him home. Enough to change everything. I moved out of the apartment Jason and I once shared and into a small one-bedroom on the east side of Grand Rapids. It wasn't much, linoleum floors, drafty windows, and a kitchen the size of a hospital closet, but it was ours. I cleared the living room of furniture and turned it into a therapy space. Yoga mats for stretching, blankets, books, toys that made sound and light up when touched. Every object in that apartment had a purpose. Every inch was designed around Noah. The crib was donated. The swing was secondhand. The mobile above his bed was handmade from ribbons and bells tied with trembling fingers at 2 a.m. Every morning began the same. Massage to loosen his limbs. Range of motion stretches. Gentle rocking. Skin-to-skin contact if his breathing allowed. We worked on holding his head, on following objects with his eyes. I sang to him even when my voice cracked, even when I forgot the words. At night, I read aloud from medical textbooks. I memorized milestones and setbacks. I emailed specialists, joined forums, watched parents on YouTube explain how to build sensory boards from cereal boxes and duct tape. I studied like my license depended on it, because it did. But more than that, his life did too. And then one Tuesday, the hospital called. They were referring me to a new pediatric rehab center. Hope Steps Therapy. It was across town, nearly an hour by bus with 2 transfers. But I didn't hesitate. I carried Noah on my chest in a wrap, diaper bag over one shoulder, portable oxygen tank on the other. We made that trip 3 times a week. Rain or sun, exhausted or not. That's where I met him. Dr. Daniel Reyes. He wasn't what I expected. Younger than most, barely 30, with sleeves rolled up and a smile that felt like light through a stained glass window. He greeted me like I was his colleague, not just the single mom with the sick baby. He knelt in front of Noah's stroller and said, "Hey there, champ. Ready to work?" Noah smiled. I'd never seen that smile before. Open, full, like something inside him had cracked open and let the world in. After the session, Daniel turned to me and said, "He's strong and responsive. You're doing more than most parents do in a lifetime." I didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to me like that. Not the social workers, not the other doctors, not even Jason. That night, While Noah slept curled against my chest, I stared at the ceiling and whispered, "We're not alone anymore." I didn't know where it would lead. I didn't know if I could even afford to hope. But something had shifted again, and this time I wasn't afraid of it. Daniel didn't just treat Noah's body. He spoke to him with respect, with patience, like Noah understood every word, which in his own way he did. Every week, Daniel introduced something new, a game, a sound experiment, a makeshift tool he built from foam and Velcro to help Noah learn to grip. But more than that, he brought energy, joy, a kind of hope I hadn't realized I'd been carrying alone for too long. He started coming by our apartment twice a week, saying it helped him tailor Noah's exercises to our environment. I didn't argue. I couldn't. Those visits became the highlight of our routine, not just for Noah, but for me. Daniel never looked at me like I was fragile or foolish. He didn't ask why I'd taken on something so hard. He just showed up. Every time. One evening, after Noah had fallen asleep on the couch, Daniel stayed later than usual. We sat on the floor, backs against the wall, surrounded by scattered toys and folded laundry. "You're doing something extraordinary," he said, eyes fixed on the ceiling. "You know that, right?" "I don't feel extraordinary," I admitted. "Most days, I feel like I'm just surviving." He smiled. "Sometimes that's enough." I turned to face him. "You treat him like he's normal." "He is normal," he said gently. "He just moves through the world differently." That sentence stayed with me. One night, I tried to pay him for all the extra sessions. I had scraped together a little from part-time shifts and freelance chart reviews. I handed him an envelope. He pushed it back. "I'm not doing this for money, Emily." "Then why?" "Because I believe in him, and I believe in you." I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. Just sat there, stunned by how rare, how incredibly rare, it was to be believed in without conditions. It was only a matter of time before the lines between us blurred. Slowly, naturally, without declarations or drama. Just small gestures, shared glances, quiet laughter, his hand brushing mine as he passed me a toy. The first time he kissed me, it was almost shy, barely more than a question. But the way I answered him left no doubt. For the first time in what felt like years, I allowed myself to feel something for me. Not for Noah, not for survival, but for love. Real love. Of course, real love never comes without real consequences. When Daniel told his parents about me, about Noah, the reaction wasn't what either of us hoped for. "You're wasting your life," his mother had said. "You're choosing someone else's burden." "They're not a burden," he replied. "They're my family." I wasn't there for that conversation, but I felt the weight of it every time he came home with a heavier silence. So I made the hardest decision I'd made since walking into that hospital. I stepped back. I didn't tell Daniel face to face. I wrote a message. Short, careful, final. "I think we need space. I don't want to come between you and your family." Then I turned off my phone and sat on the kitchen floor with Noah in my arms, waiting for the ache in my chest to dull. It didn't. Not that night. Not the next. But I survived. I always had. The days returned to their rhythm. Therapy, feedings, appointments. I kept things moving. I told myself I had done the right thing. That protecting him, protecting us, was more important than chasing something that maybe was never ours to begin with. Then, one night, when the sky was pouring and Noah was finally asleep, someone knocked. I opened the door to find Daniel, soaked to the bone, chest heaving, eyes unreadable. "I'm not leaving," he said, stepping into the apartment without waiting for permission. "Not again. Not until you hear me out." I stood frozen. "My parents don't get a vote," he continued. "They come from a different world. One where tradition is everything and shame is louder than truth. But I'm not them. I'm not going to live my life hiding from what I want." He stepped closer, his voice low now. "I want you. And I want him." I wanted to argue, to list all the reasons it would be hard, messy, impossible, but I couldn't. Because the truth was I wanted him to. Not as a lifeline, not as a savior, but as someone who saw Noah the way I did and stayed anyway. I let him hold me, let the rain soak through the open window, let the fear drain out of me like water in a cracked basin. We got married in a tiny courthouse ceremony 2 months later. No white dress, no band, just a borrowed suit, a bouquet of daisies, and a toddler in a bow tie who insisted on trying to eat the rings. Noah walked down the aisle, 3 careful steps in his little walker, clutching the box like it was treasure. Everyone cried, even Maggie. She was the one who handed me a letter afterward, folded carefully in her palm. Inside was a drawing Noah had made during his last visit to the hospital, a stick figure with curly hair holding hands with a tiny blob labeled me. Daniel filed for official adoption papers that same week. The moment the judge banged the gavel and said, "Approved," he whispered, "I've been his father since the first time he smiled at me." Life didn't magically get easier, but it finally felt like it had a direction, a center. 3 people, once broken in their own ways, now fused into something whole. Not perfect, but whole. We were a family, and that was enough to keep going, no matter how far the road ahead. Sometimes I still catch myself staring at him, this tall, broad-shouldered young man who used to fit inside the crook of my elbow. His voice has changed, deeper now, warm like his father's. His stride is steady, purposeful, though there's still the faintest hint of a limp, a quiet echo of where he came from. Noah's a third-year psychology student now. He works part-time as a counselor's assistant at the very same pediatric center where he learned to walk. He has his father's curiosity and my stubborn streak. He makes terrible coffee but remembers everyone's birthday. And when he laughs, it still lights up a room. One Sunday evening, we were setting the table for dinner when he cleared his throat and said, "Mom, there's something I need to tell you." He still calls me that, Mom, like it's the most natural thing in the world, like it's always been mine. I looked up from the plates. He was holding hands with a young woman, petite with short hair and bright, kind eyes. Her name was Nadia. She'd been volunteering at the therapy center for 2 years, working with nonverbal children. The way she looked at him made something in my chest go soft. "We're expecting," he said, voice trembling just enough to give him away. I froze. Nadia squeezed his hand. "You're going to be a grandmother." My knees nearly buckled. I sat down, covered my mouth, and laughed through the tears. Daniel clapped him on the back while pretending not to wipe his own eyes. "And there's more," Noah added. Nadia reached into her purse and pulled out a folded brochure. "We're starting a foundation," she said, "for children with cerebral palsy, for the ones who don't have voices yet, or someone to fight for them." Noah smiled. "We're naming it after your story. Quiet Love." The words didn't come easily. I wanted to say so much, that I was proud, that I was overwhelmed, that I couldn't believe how far we'd come. But all I managed was a whisper. "Thank you." Later that night, after the dishes were cleared and they'd gone home, I sat in my office flipping through old files. And there he was, baby Noah, 6 months old, eyes too big for his face, curled up in a hospital crib with a feeding chart, untouched for 10 hours. I traced the photo with my finger, not out of sadness, but gratitude. He had given me everything, and somehow I had helped give him the world. One small choice, one night, one forgotten child in a quiet room, and now a legacy. I stood by the window, staring into the night. Somewhere across town, my son was holding the next generation in his hands, and I knew, no matter what came next, we had already done something that mattered. Our porch has become the heart of the home. Daniel built it the summer after Noah learned to walk unassisted. Wide planks, rocking chairs, soft lights strung overhead. It faces the garden where we planted apple trees the year we married. Now, every season they bloom with a quiet kind of pride. Tonight, the porch is full. Daniel is sitting with Halim and Farida, his parents, who finally accepted our family not because we changed, but because time softened what pride hardened. Nadia's laughing with Noah over something on his phone. She's carrying their child now, almost 5 months along. Her hand keeps resting over the bump, like a promise she's already keeping. I sit back and watch. The scene feels surreal, but real in every way that counts. Noah stands suddenly, grinning like he used to when he was little and figured out something new. We got the first major donor, he announces. The foundation's going to open its first therapy scholarship next month. There are cheers, clapping, hugs. I don't say much. I just hold it all in, this moment, this life, and breathe. When the others drift inside for dessert, I stay behind. The night is cool. Stars scattered across a sky untouched by city light. I close my eyes and think back to a very different night. A hospital corridor, a silent room, a child no one remembered. And that sound, not even a cry really, just a dry, soft gasp. It still echoes in me. That moment wasn't just a turning point, it was the point. A single instant where love slipped in so quietly it didn't even need a name. It just settled in my bones and refused to leave. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't checked that room. If I'd been too tired, too jaded, too obedient to a system that told me which children were worth noticing. What if I'd walked by? But I didn't. I listened to the whisper the world ignored. And from that whisper grew a life, a family, a legacy. Daniel steps outside, 2 mugs of tea in his hands. He hands me one, leans against the railing beside me. We don't speak for a while. We don't have to. Then he says, almost a whisper, "You know, none of this would have happened if you hadn't stayed that night." I nod. Noah. The foundation. Us. I know. He looks at me. You changed his life. I smile into the steam. He changed mine first. Because sometimes it's not the loudest voices that shape the world. Sometimes it's the quiet ones, the ones barely heard above the noise, the ones whispered at the edge of despair. I'm still here. And someone finally hears them.